All right, I'm going to jump back in here into Chapter 10. Chapter 10 has a different way of doing what we just looked at. And as they mention here, if you read Chapter 9, you see how to use Flexbox or the flexible box layout to lay out your different pages. All right. It says now in this chapter, you'll learn another way that you can do it, and it's called grid layout. My hope, and I've got to look at the way that Evan set his tests up, all right, because my hope is that I can write a test for you. If you remember this from before when I showed you this, now if I'd have looked at this, I might have said, oh my God, you're testing us on 5 frigging chapters? But my hope is that there will be nothing from Chapter 9 and nothing from Chapter 10 on your test. So the test will be solely on Chapters 8, which is responsive design, which we'll look at after our next break. 11, which will mean that's where you'll be updating and upgrading that form. And 12. All right, I'm going to have to ask Tom if he can record some videos, or else I'm going to have to find some. You're going to embed those inside of the website. All right, so that's the plan at least. Now the author says here, in this chapter you'll learn how to use another CSS3 module called grid layout. You can use grid layout to develop complex page layouts more easily rather than Flexbox. Because of that, we think that grid layout represents the future of web page layouts. Now, I'm going to tell you this, not meant to be dirty or anything. It's not meant to make you smile. You ever heard the saying that opinions are like butts? Everybody's got one. You know, that's this author is saying that this is going to represent the future of web page layout. And you know what? They may be totally correct, but nobody knows. All right? Because somebody else might be planning something now that's much easier to use. All right, so you can see what's in here. Getting started with grid layout, how to define grid areas for elements, a responsive web page that uses the grid, and common page layouts that use the grid. So again, as I said to you before, please don't think, well, I'll be fine with this. I'll just memorize it. All right. I want to even look at the the written tests for this chapter and for the previous chapter. If I don't like the written tests, I'm going to throw them out. You're just not going to take them. All right. Now, when I do stuff like that, typically what happens is my counterparts at St. Louis send me an email asking me what the hell I'm doing. All right. They don't like that because we're supposed to keep as lockstep as we can. You might say, well, why is that? It's because that's what the Higher Learning Commission, who basically gives the accreditation for this institution, that's what they've decided. All right. So it says in Chapter 6, you learn how to use floats. Then in Chapter 9, you learn how to use Flexbox. Now you learn how to use grid layout or grid to lay out content with both rows and columns. The big difference with this is if you use Flexbox, at least somewhat, you're constrained. In other words, if you've got a fairly uniform type of layout, Flexbox works really well. But if you've got a screwy layout, in other words, you want stuff in really kind of weird places on a page, all right, and you may have a good reason for doing that, Flexbox probably isn't as good of an alternative as grid layout is. All right. So it says there, the diagram that we'll look at in just a second illustrates the basic components of a grid layout. The grid container, as it says, consists of 4 rows and 4 columns in this example. These rows and columns are referred to as grid tracts. The lines on either side are called grid lines, and you will also have grid area. All right? And again, you look at this, I cringe at even having to give this lecture. That's why I decided to combine these 2 lectures together, because I'm looking at this and I'm saying, you know, I kind of understand what you're talking about. This just seems like so hard. It's such a pain in the butt. I don't think I'd ever want to use it. All right? It probably wouldn't be the thing that you'd be using. For example, let's say that one of your goals is, you know, your family took a vacation last year, and you want to put a very simple website out there of your family's vacation. It's not going to be for that. You're not going to use this on it. But if you are creating a website that is a very sophisticated website that, as an example, might have a lot of JavaScript, jQuery in it, you might have an online store or whatever, all right, something like this could work really well. Okay. So they give you the basic layout and the basic terms in here. All right. And as you can see, current browser support, again, it's good. I could bring it up, but it would look just like the one that we looked at basically for Flexbox. All right. In other words, it's supported by everybody except, version 10 and below of IE is iffy, for lack of better words. So, it says now that you understand the basic components, you may or may not, you're ready to learn how to create a simple grid. To do that, it says you use the properties that are presented right here. Have you noticed there's a lot of stuff? This looks very similar to almost to what we looked at in the last chapter, but it said flex, and now this says grid. All right? Because there are two ways of trying to accomplish the same types of tasks. All right? And again, there you go. So as it says, to define rows and columns, you code one value for each row or column, and you separate the values with spaces. So it's just, like I said, another way of doing very similar operations to what we looked at in the previous chapter. All right. So how to set the size of your grid tracks. All right. Notice, look up here, FR represents a fraction of the available space in the grid container. It says use this unit when building fluid grid layouts. This is really heavy stuff, using a combination of fixed and fluid tracks. All right, the more fluid it is, the more responsive it's going to be. The more fixed it is, the less responsive it's going to be. All right, and there is some math in there. But again, the idea is you are trying to take total control over how things are laid out on a web page. So that's what this chapter is. They're going to give you, they'll talk about it, but they're just going to give you lots of different examples. Notice the difference when the container is 360 pixels wide versus when it's 720. My thought and my hope is tomorrow when we look at Bootstrap, which isn't easy either, but when you start seeing the different things that are out there on the Bootstrap site, and after we create a few Bootstrap pages, you'll go, you know what? This is too hard. I'm going to use Bootstrap, which is fun. All right. Alignment of grid items and grid tracks. So again, these, I don't think it pays to go. I can sit and read to you. You probably won't like hearing it any more than I like doing it. But when you look through this, they give you some examples, but where you're really going to learn how to use this is when you see pictures of it. All right? A page layout that uses alignment. Does that kind of look familiar? That isn't exactly what you did when we worked on the last test, but you can see the idea. We had the logo, we had the navigation there. We didn't have an image there, but quite often today, this is what you see. This is what we're going to be moving toward when we get into JavaScript. What's going to happen is up here, this is going to be not just an image, it's going to be an image slider, all right, where you're going to have a carousel, whatever you want to call it. But the idea is, if Tom could give me 6 pictures, let's say, of him walking different animals or caring for different animals, that's what would be scrolling in there. Plus, we'll set it up that you'll learn about random number functions. So every time you bring the site up, it starts with a new one. Not that it starts with number 1 right away. You typically don't want that either. Right? But you'll see then that underneath that, this is actually very simple. This isn't that different from what we'll set up tomorrow, but we'll set it up using Bootstrap. All right. And again, like I said, hopefully you notice a lot of similarities between this and what we did on the last test. All right. You did it using straight CSS. It's easier to lay it out this way. All right. Tomorrow too, and hopefully one of you will remember this in case I forget, is not only are we going to be going over Bootstrap, which we will do, all right, but we're also, I don't know if you've ever heard of this package before. There is a package of software that's called Balsamic. No, it's not like balsamic vinaigrette or anything like that. What it is it's a package where you can set up a web page and literally allows you to draw things on a screen. So if you were going to say that I wanted my web page to look like what you saw before, you could draw that kind of thing out there. We're going to do that first. Why? Because sometimes, at least as a web designer / developer, you'll have to do that. You'll have to say to your end user, hey, this is how I envision this page being laid out. Am I correct? And if they go, hell no, well then you haven't really put any work into it yet other than making a drawing. All right, so you can change it around, you can move stuff around. That's what we're going to do. So one of the first things that we do tomorrow using Bootstrap, we're going to draw it first. All right, and I got a hold of a guy from Balsamic, and he has said that, hey, if your students are, we will let them use this product, which normally ain't that cheap, for free. But if we ever find out that they leave here and they're using the free product and the free code, and the code's only good for a year, but if we figure out that they're using it on a commercial site to make money, we won't let you do it anymore. See what I'm saying? So we're getting free educational privileges. All right. So the next thing on here is how to define the grid areas and the grid elements. And again, you're going to understand this when you start working with it. All right. When you get your assignment, and I've got it right here, all right, when you get the homework, it says lab assignment. Maybe it's the lab. I don't know. I think this is going to be everything that you're going to do just about for these next few chapters. But one of the things that's in here is this. Now you look at this and I'm like, oh my God, what the heck is this? It's literally something that's called flexboxfroggy.com. It's a game. When you get all the way through it, it gives you like a little froggy type of insignia. And I'm going to ask that all of you go through that. All right. And you might say, well, how are you going to prove it? I'm going to look for that little froggy thing that you're going to send to me. Well, what if I'm Devin, and what if I do it and I just go ahead and copy it over to Chris? Chris never has to do it. Yeah. But then if he has anything with Flexbox, even if it's simple on his test, and he goes, I've never done that, then I know he's never done this. All right. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. So what I'm telling you is there is software out there to help you learn this stuff. And I think there's software out there because, to me, in my humble opinion, these two chapters are the hardest two chapters in the entire book. All right? Because they're very theoretical in nature. They give you all sorts of different, you can use this particular setting or this setting or this setting, and sometimes they show you pictures. But even with this, that doesn't really help me very much. Maybe it does you. I don't know. So they set up everything in here. Notice how it's laid out. All right. And this is done almost all with math. All right. They've got named lines. All right. And as the author says right here, they talk about how to name the lines in the grid, how to identify the rows and columns, etc. All right. Template areas. So the idea, again, is you're trying to take total control over how this looks, over how this works. All right. Now, might not sound important. See this? This 12-column grid thing, this is a tie-in to Bootstrap. Because what Bootstrap does, you don't see it, but what Bootstrap does is if this is your screen, right here, it takes your screen and puts it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 different columns. And you've got control over how you lay out all 12 of those columns. In other words, you could put material in here that takes up all 12. You could have 12 things in here that each take up one column. You could have an 8 and a 4, any derivation that adds up to 12. You can't say, that's 12, and I want one after it with one more, because it's more than 12. Because what that does then is it'll take the next one and push it on to the next one. All right? So again, what I'm trying to tell you is, when you look at this section that's right here, and where they talk in here about a 12 column layout, this is what you're really going to start seeing tomorrow when we talk about Bootstrap. And I will tell you, this is my opinion. Could I be wrong? Easily. But if you can learn basic website design, which is what this class is about, all right, and you can understand how to use Bootstrap, and you can show you understand it, you should be able to get a job as a web developer. All right. There are places out there right now, for example, you may or may not have heard of this place. There's a place out there right now that's called Upwork. And with Upwork, what you do is you bid against other people. There are companies that put jobs out there. And you can bid against other people. And a lot of times, of course, it's the person who makes the lowest bid, but not always. And you get out there and I'll bid $25 an hour. They've got 100 hours worth of work. Well, then you make $2,500. That kind of an idea. But literally, you're entering into a contract with them. So in other words, if Luke does that and then never does any work, they're not going to pay him the $1,200. But the point is, with many companies that are out there today, this is what they're looking for. Is people, they've got all their content. They just want people who can lay it out in a nice way. And once you start using responsive design, all right, for example, that's 4 and that's 8. You can see that. But when you start to squish it, so if you're looking at it on a smaller device, that 4 will be all by itself. That 8 will move down here. Does that make sense? All right. Because that's what responsive web design is all about. So again, they show this. The good news about doing this with Bootstrap is we'll do tomorrow. You don't have to do any math. All right? It's kind of like all this stuff is happening, but it's happening in the background. All right? So, a natural question then would be, okay, fine, it's happening in the background. Then why would I ever want to use this? Because if you use this, if you use Flexbox or grid layout, you're taking total control over how the page is laid out. All right? So again, they come back and they're doing this again. So in other words, they're going to go back and they're going to use the same example that they used before, all right? But instead of laying it out with Flexbox, they're laying it out with a grid layout. So where you're going to see the difference is when you look at the CSS. All right? CSS here, as it says, that uses a 12-column grid. So I've given this lecture before, and people, I look at them like, oh God, I don't want to do math. It's funny. I had a student, this was years ago, Jason, I can't remember his last name. He came into class the first day, and maybe I've told you about him, I don't know. He had a long black trench coat on, which already freaked me out because it was 80 degrees outside. All right, the hair on the right side of his head went down to his shoulders. The hair on the left side of his head was shaved, so it was almost bald. All right, he ended up being a really nice guy and unbelievably talented. But he said, I want to make games. When do we start? And I'm like, okay, this was a very simple apps class where you learned how to use Word and Excel. It's not in this class. Oh, really? He was really disappointed. But I said, okay, well, what's your background, etc. And we started talking, and he goes, oh, I want to make games. I said, okay. He goes, but I don't do math. Well, then you're not going to make games. So I told him. He ended up going through the program, and he did fine. But as time went on, he decided games weren't what he wanted to do. All right? Because he had to do math. All right. So, common page layouts that use a grid layout. Okay? Now, again, you look at that logo, etc., the items. Okay? This doesn't necessarily, this can be anything. the way they've got this laid out. So these would be, for example, we've got what? This is a 3x3 grid, right? They don't have to be the same thing. You could have pictures mixed with articles, etc. And that's what they're trying to show right there. Here's an advanced grid layout. Again, sometimes when people look at this, they're like, oh my God, that's just really ugly, and it just looks, it's not that it's that hard to do. It really and truly isn't. And again, if I'm working for Chris, if Chris owns a company, all right, and I bid on Upwork, let's just say, and he's got something, and he says, this is going to be a job, you can work from home, but I'm going to have hundreds of hours for you. And I bid $100 an hour, and I make it, right, I'm going to probably have enough money that I'll be able to live on that. All right. If I'm working 8 hours a day, that's $800 a day. That's $4 grand a week. All right. So he comes up, I'm not going to say, hey, this is stupid. Why the hell would you want to do this? You're going to pay me $4,000 a week. I'm going to find a way to do it. All right. And I'm going to also note as I'm doing that, you probably don't want this, you probably, etc. And I'm going to start noting that. Why? Because when I get done, and I know he comes back to me later and says, I want this changed. Maybe I've already done it, but I just haven't shown him yet. All right. You've heard of how software goes through different revisions. There's different versions, and then there's revisions of a version. Typically, so if you've got, I guess they're called releases. But if I go from version, like for example, Bootstrap, when it went from version 2 to version 3, it was a big change. When it went from version 3 to version 4, it was a big change. When it went from version 4 to version or release 4.1, it wasn't a big change. Typically, when you have releases in software, it's to fix bugs that people have found. When you've got new versions, it's because you're adding features and new functionality. All right, so that's it then for that chapter. All right. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you this. I've got a handout for all of you. This is the lab assignment for chapters 7, 8, and 9. Really, it's 8, 9, and 10, but that's fine. Evan and I are exactly the same with our numbers. I'm going to bring up every one of these assignments that's in here. He wrote numbers 1 and 2. I did numbers 3 and 4. So if you like or don't like any of them, you can blame both of us. All right. Number 1 says, code along with the following tutorial on CSS3 media queries. Use any 960 pixel width image downloaded from Google in replacement of the image in this tutorial. Well, let's see. I think is this it right here? I think so. FA, etc. Yes. All right. So you watch this 16-minute thing. The guy runs through everything you're supposed to do. All right, and just follow along. Now, sometimes with these things, and I'm going to show you it in a minute, I don't think they have it here, but sometimes what they'll do is they'll ask you to do this, do this, do this, then they'll give you all the code down at the bottom. All right, so what I've had happen before is people just don't do the assignment. They grab all the code that's at the bottom, copy it, and turn it in. Get a good grade, then they take the test, and they're supposed to do something similar, and they don't have a flaming clue as to what they're supposed to do. And sorry if I sound like a hard ass, but I'm like, I have absolutely no sympathy for you. None whatsoever. All right? So this is the first one. Like I said, you watch this 16-minute long video and basically kind of work along with him. All right, the next one. This is the next one right here. Here, let me bring this back up, so let me close this. Code along with the following tutorial. That's this one right here. We're going to see it in a minute. Is it a great tutorial? It's okay. It's a half an hour, but I love the way this guy starts this tutorial.
This is the best internet video ever. or it's just the best that I can do.
When I watched that and I heard that, I thought, wow, what a great beginning. All right. So with that one, that's part of number 2 that you see in there. It says, code along with the following. All right, save 5 different page examples using CSS properties. All right. Again, my hope is that by deluging you here with some Flexbox and some other stuff, we can make sure that what you have to do on any test will be minimal or none. All right. Then next, you go through this Flexbox Froggy. Well, you know what? I already showed you that, right? That's this one. That's Flexbox Froggy right on the screen right there. Okay? And literally, it's one of those, type in this, type in this. Sometimes they'll tell you exactly what to type in. Other times they'll get you started and they'll say, now, what would be the command to do this? And if you get it wrong, they'll say, no, try again type of an idea. It's not that they're sitting there and they get done and they go, well, Justin, there were 330 questions in here and you got 212 right. They don't do that. It's literally just a tutorial that you follow along with. All right? All right. Then, next for number 3, build the responsive website using Bootstrap from the following tutorial. Okay? And that's right here. This is Brad Traversy. Okay? And I do believe that if you go look through go to the end of it, I think he may even give you the code. Now you look at that and it's like, my God, Jim, that's an hour and 13 minutes long. If you want to learn Bootstrap, watch that tutorial. It's really good. This guy knows his stuff. I subscribe to him. All right. He's trying to get me to be a Patreon where I have to give money per month. All right. The reason I don't do that is I have to do it through my MasterCard, and then my wife sees it on the bill and starts getting on my case. All right. But you watch that and kind of, as it says, do a code along. And then for the last one, not there. Well, the last one is this one right here. And it's another one. It's 50 minutes long. It's a Bootstrap-free crash course. So I'm going to make sure I give you some time. All right. This is actually going faster than I thought it would. So after we take our next break, all right, then what we'll do is I'll give you lab for the rest of class. If you turned in anything last Thursday and Friday, I have not graded it yet. All right. Have I graded the tests? Yes. Are they in the system? No. Because some of you will want me to regrade them based on how you did. All right. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do is I'm going to start going over Chapter 8. I don't know what page that is, but it's somewhere around here. I think it's a lot. What's that? 230? No, much higher up than that. All right. So page 281, if you'd move there in your book, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the lecture here and start the next lecture. This chapter, please make sure you read on both your next test and on the midterm. You will be asked to make the website that you create be responsive. All right, so you will want to take what you learned in this chapter. Yes?
On the coursework on the anti-rank predictions that we have a Chapter 7 lab due tomorrow, is that good?
No. I would never give you something and make it due the next day.
Okay.
All right, we'll look at, I think what that is I'll have to look during the break. Okay? All right. So I'm going to stop what I'm taping right now